The quiet at Margot Sinclair's house didn't feel peaceful. It felt organized, the kind of calm that holds as long as nobody names what's missing. We were there for a farewell dinner, the last family gathering before Cecilia Ward left for Italy, and the room kept making small decisions about where she belonged. Cecilia mattered to us because she wasn't trying to win anyone over. She'd spent years earning things the hard way, then learning how easily a family can treat effort like background noise. What came next is in her words. I got there early because I always get there early. Old habit. The driveway smelled like coastal air and someone's expensive candle drifting out through the kitchen door. Margot met me in the entryway. Shoes off in the house, she told me, like it was a rule she'd made up for me personally. Of course, I told her and set my tote down by the console table. Anne was already inside, adjusting napkins like the folds could fix everything. She glanced over. Cecilia? Hi. Hi. I kept my voice light. Edward stepped in from the den, phone still in hand. You made it. I did. A chair scraped at the main table, then another. Margot looked at the place settings, counted fast, and pointed with 2 fingers. You can sit there, sweetheart. Near the kitchen is easier. There was a small side table tucked by the swinging door, where the younger cousins were stacking rolls like building blocks. I didn't argue, I just nodded and pulled the chair out. Where's Brooke? Margot asked, like she'd remembered a name from a list. Anne's smile tightened. She couldn't make it. She's traveling. Edward cleared his throat. It's just timing. We noticed how nobody reached for Cecilia's eyes when they said it. Margot disappeared and came back with a thin box. Before we eat. Inside was a worn leather notebook, soft at the corners from use. A ribbon bookmark. Pages filled with Italian words in Margot's handwriting. For what you build, Margot said. Not what you spend. My throat tightened. Thank you. If you stay with stories like this, you start recognizing the moment a goodbye turns into a test. I slid the notebook into my lap and looked at the empty chair meant for Brooke, still perfectly set, like she was the one being honored. I opened the notebook after Margot moved back to the head of the table. The leather was softer than it looked, warm from her hands. The first page had my name written small, careful. Under it, a list of Italian words, articles, verbs, notes in the margins like reminders to herself. Anne leaned over from the counter. That's nice, she said. Very thoughtful. It is. Margot replied, already sitting. She'll need it. Edward glanced over his shoulder. You didn't have to do all that. Margot lifted her glass. I did. I ran my thumb along the edge of the page. I hadn't told her how nervous I was about leaving, about starting over in a place where I didn't know anyone. Somehow she'd written straight into that space without asking. One of the cousins whispered, Is that for school? Yeah, I said. For school. Anne smiled again. Quick and thin. She's always been good at that stuff. Edward nodded like it was settled. Cecilia's the organized one. Margot looked at me. Organization is a skill. It's not a personality. I felt my face warm and dropped my eyes back to the notebook. Across the table, Brooke's place setting caught the light. Her water glass untouched, her napkin still folded. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on top of it. Like if I let go, something might slide away. 2 nights before the dinner, I was sitting on my bed with my laptop balanced on my knees, trying to clear one last thing before packing. Tuition, final installment, nothing dramatic. I logged in, typed slowly like I always do, checked the numbers twice. Then the screen refreshed and went gray. Payment declined. I stared at it for a second, then tried again. Same message. No explanation. Just a neat line telling me the account didn't have enough funds. That didn't make sense. The balance was supposed to be there. It had been there a week earlier. I opened the account history, scrolled again. The number dropped in steps. Large ones. Transfers marked approved. Emergency access noted in small print beside the dates. I felt my chest tighten, then go flat. I called my father. He answered on the third ring. "What's up?" His voice sounded busy, like I'd interrupted something important. "The education account." I said. "I tried to pay tuition. It's empty." A pause. Paper shifting. "It's not empty." "It is. Almost 93,000 is gone." He exhaled slowly. "I was going to tell you. When soon, Cecilia. Listen, Brooke needed help. That's not her money. I know. But this was temporary." I sat back against the headboard. "You used emergency access." Another pause. Longer this time. "It was allowed," he said. "I handled it. You told them it was for me." He lowered his voice. "Don't start something you can't finish. Your grandmother doesn't need stress right now." I stared at the wall. "So what do I do? I'll fix it," he said. "Just don't make this a scene." After we hung up, I closed the laptop and stared at my packed suitcase by the door. I opened the scholarship portal and started a new application instead. Dinner moved on like nothing was wrong. Plates were passed. Someone laughed too loudly at something one of the cousins said. Anne asked if anyone wanted more bread. Margot set her fork down. "Edward," she said. Casual. Brooke didn't want to say goodbye. Anne answered before he could. "She's in Italy, doing a short program. Art. I think." Edward nodded once. "It came up last minute." Margot tilted her head. "That's nice." I felt my phone vibrate against my thigh. I didn't look right away. I knew what it would be. I'd been expecting it since my call with my father. Still, my fingers moved on their own. Brooke's face filled the screen. Sunglasses, a wide smile, a stone balcony behind her, somewhere bright and expensive. The caption talked about living fully, about finally saying yes. Another swipe showed a table set with bottles and glassware. People I didn't recognize. No classroom, no studio, no books. I locked the screen and turned the phone face down. Anne reached for her wine. "She's always been creative," she said. This could be good for her. Margot's eyes flicked toward me. "And you," she said. "Leave in a few days." Yes. Everything set. I hesitated just long enough to feel it. Almost. Edward cleared his throat. "We'll figure out the rest." Anne's knee pressed lightly against mine under the table. A warning. Or a plea. I couldn't tell any more. Margot picked up her glass again. "I'm glad you're both getting what you need," she said, and let the sentence sit there, unfinished. Margot rested her elbows on the table and looked from one face to the next, not sharp, not accusing, just patient. Which account did she use? The question landed lightly. Edward shifted in his chair. "It's complicated." Anne's hand slid under the table and closed around mine. Her grip was tight, almost urgent, nails pressing, a quiet request to let it go. I loosened my fingers and pulled my hand free. Not fast, not angry, just enough to make space. Margot waited. Edward tried again. There was an option. For emergencies. I handled it. Margot's eyes stayed on him. "Emergency access is narrow." "I know the rules," Edward said. "I've dealt with them before." I stood and reached for my bag. The room went still, like someone had turned the volume down. I laid the papers on the table one by one. Account statements, transfer approvals, a page with a line highlighted where it read, "Emergency access authorized," another with dates stacked close together. Anne whispered my name. "Barely there." I didn't look at her. I looked at Margot. The request went through as medical. I said, "That's what the bank told me." Edward's jaw tightened. It was allowed. Margot leaned forward and read. Her finger traced the line. She took her time. "Medical," she repeated. Edward nodded once. "That's what the clause is for the beneficiary." Margot said, not for someone else's convenience. I placed the last sheet down. Flight confirmations, hotel charges. The amounts added up fast, almost 93,000 gone in less than a week. Anne pressed her lips together. Edward stared at the table. Margot lifted her gaze. "You didn't borrow," she said. "You misrepresented." The word sat there, clean and exact, and nobody rushed to move it. Margot sat back and folded her hands. The papers stayed where they were, spread between the plates and the breadbasket, like they'd always belonged there. "Emergency access isn't a shortcut," she said. "It's a promise." "You broke it." Edward rubbed his thumb along the edge of his napkin. "Brooke said she was enrolling in something. A short program. Art. Fashion. She sent links?" Margot nodded once. "And you didn't verify." It sounded reasonable. Anne added softly. She needed direction. I reached into my bag again and set my phone down. Unlocked. The screen lit the table just enough. Photos scrolled past. Brooke by a pool. Brooke on a balcony. Brooke clinking glasses with people I didn't know. "Here's the schedule," I said. Or what there wasn't. Edward looked, then looked away. Margot leaned in, reading captions out loud. Late nights. Private villa? Weekend boats? She stopped. No classes. Anne's shoulders slumped. She said it was informal. Informal doesn't mean imaginary. Margot replied. The room felt smaller. Someone in the kitchen dropped a fork. No one moved to pick it up. Edward's voice dropped. "I planned to replace the money." Margot met his eyes. "You replaced trust instead." I felt my pulse in my ears, not fast. Steady, like it had settled on a decision before I had. I wasn't going to say anything tonight. I told them I already started another application. A scholarship. I was ready to postpone. Anne turned toward me, startled. "You were..." "Yes." Margot looked at me then. Really looked. "And you stayed quiet." "I tried," I said. "Until tonight." No one rushed to fill the space. The silence held, firm and exact, like a line finally drawn. Anne pushed her chair back an inch, then stopped. Her hands hovered in her lap like she didn't know what to do with them. "You should have told us sooner," she said. Not sharp, tired. "I tried." I replied. I called. I asked. Edward stared at the tablecloth, tracing a stain that wasn't there. "You didn't have to bring it here. I didn't want to." I said. My voice surprised me by staying even. I was ready to let it go. Margot turned toward me. "How far were you willing to let it go?" I already looked up deferment policies. I filled out another scholarship form. I told myself it was fine to wait. Anne's mouth opened, then closed again. I could have handled losing the money. I went on. "What I couldn't handle was hearing you talk about Brooke like she was doing something noble, like that was the story we were all supposed to repeat." Edward finally looked up. "She's your sister. I know." I nodded once. That's why I stayed quiet as long as I did. Margot leaned back, crossing her arms. "Silence has a cost. I paid it for years." I said. Tonight, I didn't want to anymore. Anne reached for my sleeve, hesitated, then let her hand fall back. The room felt paused. Plates half finished, glasses untouched. Margot broke it gently. "All right," she said. Then we stopped pretending. She looked at Edward, and the softness was gone. "Now we talk about consequences." Margot gathered the papers into a neat stack and slid them to the center of the table. "This is how it goes," she said, calm and precise. "You replace every dollar taken. You sign a statement acknowledging misuse. Then Cecilia controls what remains." Edward's fingers twitched against his glass. "And if I don't..." Margot didn't raise her voice. "Then I forward this to counsel, the trust attorney, the tax office, anyone who needs a clean record." Anne swallowed. "That feels extreme." "It's accurate," Margot replied. Edward leaned back, staring at the ceiling like the answer might be written there. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and turned it face down. A moment later, it buzzed again. "That's Brooke," Anne said quietly. Edward hesitated, then answered. He didn't put it on speaker. We heard enough anyway. Crying. Fast words. A breathless insistence that it was a misunderstanding, that the program was flexible, that people would vouch for her. Margot stood and walked a few steps away, giving him space. She didn't listen. She didn't need to. Edward ended the call and rubbed his face. She thought it would turn into something. Margot returned to the table. Thoughts aren't receipts. Silence settled again. Heavy, but clean. Edward nodded once. "I'll fix it." Margot slid a pen across the table. "Good. Then we're finished here." No one argued. No one reached for another excuse. The choice had been made, and the room seemed to accept it. It didn't happen all at once. Edward came by a week later, alone. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed inside anymore. His jacket smelled faintly of the garage. "I sold the car," he said. "The blue one." I nodded. I'd ridden in it twice in my life. There was a fund I didn't want to touch. He added, "I touched it." Margot's voice came from the living room. "The amount cleared this morning." Edward let out a breath, like he'd been holding it for days. "Brooke's sponsors are asking questions," he said, almost to the floor. "She's laying low." Margot didn't look up from her papers. That's between her and the truth. Anne hovered near the counter, folding a dish towel that was already folded. "We'll figure out what comes next," she said. "Careful." Margot finally looked at her. "No, you won't. Not with my name attached." Edward's shoulders sank. "So that's it. For the trust," Margot said. "Yes." He glanced at me then. "I hope this helps." "It does," I said, and meant it. He nodded once, small, then left without asking for a hug. Later, Margot slid the notebook back to me. "Keep it close." I did, and for the first time, it felt like something was staying instead of leaving. The airport was quieter than I expected. Early morning. Not many people talking, just wheels over tile and the low voice from the gate. Margot walked me as far as security. She adjusted the strap of my bag like she always did. Practical to the end. "You have everything she asked." "I do." She nodded. No hug this time. Just a small smile. "Call when you land." "I will." On the plane. I pulled the notebook out of my carry-on and rested it on the tray table. The pages were bent now. Mine. Finally. I flipped to the back and wrote one line in Italian, slow and careful. Then I closed it. The apartment in Milan was smaller than the photos. Clean. Quiet. The window opened onto a narrow street where someone was arguing with a delivery driver about nothing important. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the room settle around me. For a long time, I thought leaving meant losing something. Approval. Belonging. A version of myself that stayed small enough to be accepted. What I learned was simpler. Cecilia Ward didn't leave angry. She left informed, with her name intact, with choices that didn't require permission. I unpacked the notebook first and set it on the desk by the window. If this story stayed with you, you already know why.